Welcome to Dublin. You are currently in my living room, my new living room, and this is actually possibly going to be my living room pretty much for the rest of my life, which is a really, really weird thing to say. It will obviously be going under a lot of renovation, and there will be different phases and stages along the road. It will probably look totally different, hopefully in 5 years' time, than it does right now. But yeah, essentially this is my forever living room, and I'm finding it really weird to be making videos here actually. Strangely, I had forgotten how much the space you're in actually really affects how comfortable you feel in front of the camera. Like, you get really used to sitting in a particular seat and looking at it in a particular way and talking, and yeah, this is weird for me. And also I am going to be doing kind of temporary changes to this space going forward, so I'm going to be moving around probably different places in the house and figuring out what the best place for me is to film. So bear with me, basically, is what I'm saying. It might take me a while to kind of get back into the swing of things. It's also going to take me a while to have maybe more meaty topics to talk about and so on the channel. It's all just gonna still take a while to settle in, but I'm hoping that, now that I'm actually filming here, now that I've been here for 2 weeks, so yeah, if you've been under a rock or haven't been watching my videos, which isn't really the same thing, if you haven't been watching my videos, then you might know that I just recently moved from Edinburgh to Dublin 2 weeks ago, actually not even 2 weeks ago, which is kind of mind-blowing because it feels like way longer. But 2 weeks ago I moved from Scotland to Ireland as a kind of, for the foreseeable future anyway, this is going to be my home, and everything is in turmoil, of course. My life is still at least partly in boxes, and yeah, it's going to take a while for everything to settle down, and the last few videos I've been making have really been kind of just unpacking what the move feels like for me and how it has been feeling and where I've been at with my mental state with regards to that, and how my spirituality has fit in with that and so on. And I think going forward for the next 2 or 4 videos, it's going to be something similar. Like, I'm not going to be kind of able to come up with more unique topics or things that are very far away from what I'm experiencing right now, because it's kind of a little bit all-consuming. I haven't done any work on my PhD in a while and so on. I haven't really done work on anything in a while other than things that are very immediate and admin stuff and moving stuff, and yeah, it's a lot. So today I'm really just going to talk a little bit about Mabon, or the autumn equinox, because that happened yesterday, or a couple of days ago when I upload this, and I haven't done a kind of a chat about the wheel of the year or chat about the Sabbath kind of video in a while. So to start with, I don't really use the term Mabon, even though I kind of use it for video titles a little bit and hashtags and stuff, just because a lot of other people do use that term, just because it doesn't really have any particular connotations for me. Mabon isn't an Irish term, and for the most part I use Irish terms for the Sabbats as much as possible, because that's my culture, that's my background, and we don't actually have any mythological or archaeological or textual evidence for celebration of the equinoxes in Ireland. There are some megalithic tombs that are aligned with the equinox, so that the sun shines in or shines on the tomb at sunrise at the equinox and that kind of thing, and we do have some tombs like that. So at some point in our history there was probably some association, some religious or spiritual connotation with the equinoxes, but we don't have any evidence for what that was or what it was called. So yeah, I've never really come up with a name that feels completely right for me for this time of year, even though it actually is probably my favourite Sabbath. I really love autumn and spring, and they're my favourite times of year. Autumn for me on paper is kind of my favourite, but spring, I tend to feel the best at spring. I tend to go through a big surge of creativity and energy around April. Autumn I don't really get that as much, but it's still a really, really positive time for me. And like so many other people, I have kind of positive associations of change and newness and novelty with September, ironically, even though it's kind of a time of waning and like increasing darkness and harvest and that kind of thing. I very much associate it with being kind of the new year, and For many years I have sort of thought of Mabon, or the autumn equinox, as being my new year. I didn't focus on that so much this year with ritual, but I'll get into that in a minute, because it is the beginning of the school year, and you know, I have been in school. I mean, in school, like I'm still doing my PhD, and I had 4 years of being back in college. So let's see, so that's 23. I've had 23 Septembers. No, I lie. 22 Septembers, because my first year in school I actually started midway through the year, etc. But I've had a lot of Septembers in my life that have been the start of a new school year for me. So it's gotten very, very ingrained. And a lot of changes just tend to be happening at this time of year. So for that reason, it's always been a favourite of mine. It's a time for kind of contemplation and looking back at the year that's just happened. But also, kind of crucially, it's just been a time for me when I feel very reinvigorated in my spirituality. For some reason, just the turning leaves and the kind of light we have at this time of year, and maybe just the kind of whole harvest festival thing as well. It always feels like I don't know, there are a lot of films and TV programs and books and stuff that I associate, like cultural stuff that I associate with this time of year, that just kind of get me into a more kind of spiritual mindset, I guess. So I do tend to find that sometimes my spirituality is at its strongest at this time of year. So yeah, I'm still trying to think of a better name for it. I called it the autumn turning for some reason. I had the spring turning and the autumn turning for a long time, well, for a few years at one point, but I'm not sure how I feel about that. And like I say, Mabon, it just doesn't have a ring to it for me. So if any of you have any ideas about, or if you have a name that you use for this time of year yourself, if you're in the northern hemisphere like I am, do let me know, because yeah, I feel weird about the fact that I don't have a name that I feel like very comfortable with, because midsummer and midwinter are kind of easy, they roll off the tongue, but autumn equinox, spring equinox, like, it's a bit of a mouthful. So yeah, I said that I didn't really focus so much on the kind of new year aspect of it this year in ritual, and I think it's just because I don't really need to over egg the whole change and a new time in my life thing in ritual this year, because it's just so apparent. Like, everything has changed. I've left behind so much, and I'm stepping into the unknown, and I'm stepping into this new life that is a little bit hard to get off the ground, because I'm busy kind of unpacking and making changes to the house, and also very busy with my best friend's wedding, which is happening on Friday. I'm the maid of honour, and I've got a lot of kind of preparation to do for that and thinking to do around that. So I kind of feel a bit like I'm in this very liminal space right now. And where there's a lot of uncertainty about like what my life is going to look like going forward, but it does very much feel like not only a new year, but like a new phase of my life. So I really didn't need to kind of focus on that so much, I guess, this year. And I feel like I've kind of looked back over the last year and the last 4 years ad nauseum over the past few months while I've been preparing to leave Edinburgh. So I didn't really need to do so much of that. I tried to maybe think a little bit about what kind of conclusions I've come to at this point about what my time in Edinburgh has meant. And one realisation that I did have was, I'm not going to get into it too much because it's all obviously very personal, but one realisation I had was around how much or how little time and energy I give to myself and to my own endeavours without regards to other people, or to thinking about what other people might want, and particularly with romantic relationships, because those tend to be the ones that most dictate how you spend your time and where you live and how you plan your future and so on. And that's kind of been what I've taken away from my 4 years in Edinburgh, was just like a sense that, especially in the last year and maybe the next year going forward, that I'm in a space where I really need to be just focusing on myself, and that it's been very, very good for me to not be dating anyone and to just be very much focused, trying to focus anyway, on doing something for myself, on moving country for myself, and also planning towards working on different projects and spending time on things that I want to spend time on without just having other people kind of pulling on my time quite so much. I also often try to think about, on the more positive side I try to think about like what it is that I might want to start manifesting once I have kind of released what needs to be released at this time of year. I definitely see this time of year as the ultimate time of relinquishing the old to make space for the new. And I usually like to kind of have something in mind, roughly speaking, for what that newness might be. So I like to kind of look back over the past 12 months, think about what it is that needs to be released in my personal life, in my personality, in how I'm spending my time, in where I'm placing my energy and all of that kind of thing, and in my spiritual practice. But yeah, I do like to, rather than just get bogged down so much in the negative in what needs to be let go of, I usually like to also think a little bit. Now, I tend to use the kind of light half of the year more to think about manifestation, but I don't like to pass up any opportunity, really, in the wheel of the year, to incorporate my spirituality a little bit with a bit of self-development, and to think a little bit about my own self-development moving forward, and like what it is that I want to kind of bring into my life and invite into my life, and also just relating to my spiritual practice, like I say, like what's working, what's not working, and so on. But this time around I really just didn't have too much stuff in terms of concrete ideas of what it is that I want to manifest going forward. I mean, I guess I want certain feelings and I want to build certain things. I want to build a life. That's kind of all there is to it, but there's so much and it's all so vague that it's kind of, I'm in a place where I just don't know what that's going to look like, and I don't even know what to hope for or to be planning for. And I'm very, very much still in this liminal stage, like I said, of like not really, I don't know, I'm still having to just let go of the past life and put everything in place and put everything in order so that I can be ready in a while to kind of maybe really go kind of full force towards that new life and towards making those new friends and building those new habits and so on. Which is a little bit frustrating. Like I definitely found that I was feeling a little bit stagnant and frustrated, and yeah, like I definitely would rather be able to kind of go full throttle into certain projects and you know, be meeting like 5 different people every week and just throwing myself into all these different things. But like realistically, I'm the kind of person who likes to have things, all my ducks in a row to an extent, before I can kind of go full throttle into something. And I definitely, because I'm a perfectionist, I definitely need to kind of draw the line sometimes a little bit with that and say to myself like, no, you know, like maybe you need to just accept that things aren't going to be perfect, and you need to like live your life and keep moving and keep making progress with all these other things, like rather than waiting until it's the perfect time to do so. But at the same time, it's a very kind of hanged man time of my life, and I think to some degree there's an element that I need to kind of make peace with that and, you know, be at one with the kind of liminality of this time of year, and just feel the loss and the sadness at what I'm leaving behind and what I'm letting go, and just ease into it gradually. In terms of what I've been thinking about kind of spiritually and existentially around this time of year, I found myself thinking a lot about death, actually, and this is partly just because of what I've been reading. I've been reading around things around kind of human consciousness and altered states of consciousness a lot recently, and I've been reading a book on entheogens, on psychedelic drugs, and it's been an absolutely fascinating read. I'm going to do a proper review of it at some point when I've actually finished it. It's been really, really interesting. I personally have never tried any of those kinds of drugs. I definitely wouldn't be averse to it. But it's more that I came to this book more out of a current fascination, well, an ongoing fascination that I have with human consciousness and the way that the human mind operates. So it's always been an interest of mine, and maybe even more so, like I say, in recent kind of months, I read a lot about dreaming and lucid dreaming and the mind and consciousness and so on. That's just kind of the phase I've been in. And even though most of the books I'm reading are not like overtly spiritual, I definitely see any of that kind of reading and that kind of thinking as being part of my spiritual practice and part of my spiritual growth. And yeah, that book that I've been reading, that I'm reading currently, it has been talking about death, because it's been talking about the use of psychedelic drugs to help cancer patients and people who are terminally ill to kind of make peace with their oncoming death. And it definitely, I think just thinking about consciousness in general as well, it always definitely gets me thinking about loss of self and the loss of ego, and then what that means for death and in death, and how I understand that. And for some reason it's really been like my own death and the death of people I love is something that I've been grappling with quite a lot in recent times. Maybe it's just that I'm getting a bit older and I'm in my 30s now, and maybe it's moving back to Ireland and feeling like I'm settling into the rest of my life, but I've really been having to come to terms all over again. Like I feel like this is something that we go through again and again throughout our lives, and sometimes we just come up against it in a particularly overt way where we just kind of realize like, oh, at some point I will die and there's nothing I can do about that, and sometimes it just hits us like a wave. And like, I wouldn't say that I'm terrified of death, but I wouldn't say that I'm completely comfortable with it as a concept either. Like, it definitely, I think my relative fear of death drives me a lot in my life, and I definitely operate from a place of fear of death a lot, and it's something that I kind of want to maybe work through a bit more, and it is something that I have been thinking about. I don't necessarily feel like I need to have a belief in an afterlife in order to make peace with death, and that's something that I'm always kind of conscious of. I feel like a lot of the time people make peace with their death through believing in some kind of continuation of the self, and I wonder if there's any other way that we can make peace with it. I actually, like, genuinely, I feel like maybe there isn't, but for me it's more about more kind of, rather than a continuation of the ego, the way that I deal with these feelings is through thinking about the continuation of like my physical body by, returning to the earth and feeding other types of beings and plants and animals, and that I am going to continue to be part of the cycle of this earth in a physical sense. And then also I do tend to think a lot about consciousness, and I do have a vague belief in a kind of universal consciousness, and a lot of the experiences that are being discussed in that book that are experienced through entheogens and so on, are experiences that I have experienced. Basically, they sound very akin on a maybe more extreme level to things that I have felt myself while fully sober, while in kind of altered states of consciousness in ritual, or sometimes just altered states of consciousness while out for a walk, while out in nature and that kind of thing. There definitely does seem to be a relatively universal type of mystical experience where the individual feels like has a sense of a loss of ego and taps into a slightly different form of consciousness or awareness that feels more fundamental, that feels like it operates at a higher level, at a more basic level than the kind of monkey mind ego chatter that we have going on in the front of our brains most of the time. And a lot of the time, if we meditate a lot, that is the kind of state that we slip into, and it's definitely something that I accessed, I think, from beginning meditation. And so through my experiences meditating and my various different types of mystical experiences that I've had over the years, I have developed a sort of belief might be a strong word, but a sort of understanding of consciousness as being a fundamental kind of universal principle. And in that sense, in those moments, I definitely have a sense of like a complete loss of fear of death, because there's this sense of, well, this consciousness or awareness that I'm experiencing is never going to end. As long as anything is in existence, it will continue, because it just feels so fundamental and so connected with everything else that it's impossible to imagine that my physical body and brain and even my ego dissipating, that is going to have any effect on that overall kind of universal consciousness, if that makes sense. And in a lot of ways, I think thinking that way is exactly the same as believing in an afterlife, and believing that your kind of ego, or I mean maybe not your ego, but that a soul or your personality is the word that I'm trying to think of. Believing that your personality, your memories, like you as you know yourself, is going to continue after death. I think it's interesting to me that seems to be the only way that we can kind of mitigate that sense of fear and discomfort in the face of death, usually, is through believing or thinking about the ways in which we do continue, whether that's our bodies returning to the earth, some form of consciousness, or, you know, feeling like we're connected to some form of consciousness that transcends our ego and transcends our minds and our physical being, or whether it's just through the things we leave behind, the thoughts and ideas we leave behind, if we have children or just loved ones in general whose lives we have touched. I think these are all the ways that we kind of deal with this, and that's interesting to me, that maybe ultimately, is it possible to really make peace with just ending and your life just no longer having an effect on the world? Has anyone ever managed to do that in a way that feels kind of comfortable and satisfying? I don't know. I'd be curious about that, and this is maybe a topic that I'd like to read up on more and to think about more going forward. I think as humans we are beings who are really bound up in the idea of meaning, and in finding meaning in our lives and feeling as though our lives have purpose. So it kind of makes sense to me that when we face the ultimate kind of meaning destroying experience or moment of death, that we can only really reconcile that, we can only really make peace with that through believing that we will continue to have meaning in some way, that our existence will continue to have meaning in some way beyond our death. It does seem like probably a fairly natural part of the human experience, because, like I say, we are so caught up with finding meaning in everyday life, in our own lives, in our own narratives, and so on. So yeah, I think this time of year is it's a pretty apt time for me to be thinking about this stuff, because we are kind of very solidly in the dark half of the year now, and very much looking at questions of kind of death and decay, because that's what we're seeing in the world around us. And in the northern hemisphere right now, we are seeing the leaves dropping from the trees, and you know, kind of just darkness descending, and this sense that the world is starting to slow and starting to kind of hibernate, I guess, for the winter. So we very much associate this time of year with death, and with thinking about, you know, what that means when individual flowers and leaves and different parts of nature, when they start to decay back into the earth. But at the same time, of course, we associate this time of year with harvest, and there is kind of this sense of, I don't know, that we're reaping something out of this time of year when we're thinking about darkness and dark things and death and decay and that kind of thing. It's actually a time of year when we can maybe reap the most out of our spirituality, because we're being called to think about such heavy kind of spiritual matters, I suppose. So I like to think about it that way. So that's pretty much what Mabon, or the autumn equinox, has been for me this year. It's I mean, yeah, it's been everything that I've been describing in the last couple of videos about kind of change and leaving things behind and thinking about losing friends, and it's been all of that. And it's, you know, there's kind of this sense of promise for something new, and for change, and for manifesting kind of new things, new habits, new people, and all of that. But it's still in the future for me. So I'm still very much stuck in this kind of time of the dissolution of things rather than the creation of things. And yeah, I'm fairly comfortable with that right now. I'm fairly comfortable with this liminal place, and feeling like I still have a lot to do before I can kind of embark on like my real life. But yeah, getting there gradually. So thanks for watching as always. I'd love to hear how your Mabon or Ostara have been, depending on whether you're in the northern or southern hemisphere. I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have on these topics, and yeah, I will be talking to you again soon.